Hi guys, Pete the Wargamer here, back with another bolt action tutorial. In this video I'll be showing you how to paint the British 8th Army, also known as the Desert Rats, using the miniatures from Warlord Games as well as the Army Painter range of paints. Now before we go on, if you wanted to try out the techniques in this tutorial, Wargames Illustrated are giving away a free sprue in the February edition of either these British 8th Army miniatures, a sprue of Deutsche Afrika Korps, or some of the brand new Commonwealth troops. Now before we start painting, we first of all need to apply a primer so that the later layers of paint adhere to the miniature surface. It doesn't matter too much which colour you go for, but I have opted to use a grey airbrush primer to help paint the various mid-tones of the miniature. The first area that we'll be painting is the tan coloured uniform, and for this we'll be starting off with a base coat of Banshee Brown. As with all the base coats that I'll be painting in this video, you'll want to mix this paint with some water in roughly equal quantities to make the paint easier to work with. With our paint thinned out, we now want to paint the entirety of the shirt and shorts. Don't worry about getting perfect coverage with your first layer, as this is why we watered down our paint. After applying your first layer, allow the paint to dry before applying a second over the top. This layering technique will give us a much smoother finish whilst avoiding the possibility of obscuring details by applying the paint too thickly. To paint the webbing and the gaiters of your infantrymen, we'll be using a base coat of combat fatigues. This is to give them a slightly bleached green appearance. For the green coloured socks that are poking out above the gaiters, we'll be using a base coat of Venom Wyrm. With the socks completed, we can now move on to the felt covering of the water bottle. For this, I'll be applying a base coat of Leather Brown. To paint any wooden area, such as the rifle or the entrenching tool handle, we'll be looking to create a slightly reddish brown colour. To do this, start with a base coat of Dirt Spatter. Next, we'll be painting the black areas of the miniature, which include the boots and metal areas. However, instead of using a black paint, we'll be using the very dark grey Necromancer Cloak instead. This is to allow the later dark tone wash to create some definition between the recessed and raised areas. For the skin of our infantrymen, use a base coat of Kobold Skin. Remember to continue thinning down your paint, as getting a smooth coverage on these areas is especially important. With our base coats completed, we now want to apply a wash of soft tone, but before we do, we need to again thin it down. This is because applying it straight from the bottle would be much too strong. However, instead of using water, this time I'll be mixing in some of the Army Painter's Quickshade mixing medium in equal parts wash to medium. The medium works by reducing the amount of pigment in the ink without changing its consistency. I find that this results in a much smoother and more subtle result than mixing in with water. However, if you don't have access to this medium, you could instead use a distilled water. Armed with your thinned soft tone, you now want to apply this wash to lighter tan coloured areas such as the helmet and the fatigues. Following the same principles as before, apply a wash of strong tone over the leather brown and dirt spatter painted areas. To enhance the subtle greenish hue of the webbing, we'll be applying a wash of military shader. You can also apply this wash to the socks as well. As I mentioned earlier, apply a layer of dark tone over the areas that we painted with Necromancer Cloak. The final wash will be applied to the skin, and for this we'll be using Flesh Wash. To give a slightly more tanned appearance, apply a couple of layers, allowing the first layer to dry fully before doing so. We will start off by painting the fatigues using Drake Tooth. By thinning down the paint with just a little water, we should make this task much easier, as the flow of paint should be much smoother than if you'd used it straight from the bottle. To pick out the ridges of the socks, use some army green and a thin brush. To highlight the edges of the webbing and to continue that bleached green colour, we will be using some Necrotic Flesh. For the brown cloth areas such as the canteen, we'll be using an edge highlight of Monster Brown. In order to bring out the details in the rifle and other wooden parts of the miniature, you'll want to make use of Fur Brown. To give the black leather areas a slightly shiny appearance, we'll be applying an edge highlight of Spaceship Exterior. By applying a thin light grey line, we help to create the impression that light is reflecting off a glossy surface. For the details in the face, you'll want to use Corpse Pale to add some highlights to the lips, chin, cheekbones and nose, leaving the darker skin tones in the recesses. If you applied several layers of Flesh Wash to get that tanned appearance, you instead might want to use Kobold Skin at this stage instead. The final highlight to apply is one of Gunmetal. This will be focused on the metal areas that we painted with Necromancer Cloak. By highlighting the edges of these very dark grey areas, we will create the effect of blackened metal that has become worn through use. And here we have the finished 8th Army infantryman. I finished things off by varnishing the miniature before creating a simple basing scheme using some textured paints. As I mentioned before, you will either find a Warlord Games 8th Army, Commonwealth or DAC sprue in your February edition of War Games Illustrated, so keep an eye out for that magazine in your newsagents if you would like to try out the techniques used in this video. You can find a full list of all the paints that I've used in this tutorial in the description below, along with any other equipment I've used to create this video, such as my everlasting wet palette. If you enjoyed this video, do let me know in the comments below, and if you haven't done so already, be sure to check out my Patreon page if you would like to support me in making these videos. If you have any questions or would just like to chat with others who enjoy my channel, I've set up a Discord server which you can find a link to in the description below. And so the only thing left to say is, thanks for watching and goodbye.